I asked if there was any truth to God or source. I asked if there was, something more important about the universe other than just materialism and death. These are just like deep meditations. There's no sacred plants or anything. It's just deep meditation and, trancing to, drum tracks and stuff like that. And just ask, the great source and great spirit, like, well, how do I do this? And they're like, oh, go be a backpacker. It's like really simple answers, So like, okay, I got a backpack and went to Peru and went looking for these people. And ultimately I ended up finding them, which is, even crazier to really think about it. It's kind of more interesting, but it happened just like I had seen in the visions and in the dreams. And so, you kind of embrace that journey and you go on it, and you take the good with the bad that comes on that journey. And there's a lot of trials and tribulations that you go through, but ultimately I think it's incredibly rewarding because you're fulfilling something deep inside yourself instead of just a role. And so, that sense that there's something very important behind what you're doing is always present, and it's something that can be shared with others. So in my case, it was go to Peru, find the apprenticeship, do the apprenticeship, start training, and then it was going to unfold from there. So it was all laid out in a very step-by-step kind of fashion.
Was there resistance in you to follow that? Like, this thing, it feels so strong that I have to follow it. How did that unfold for you?
At first, for me, I just didn't know. I was living in California at the time. I was in my early 20s. I just graduated from the university. I didn't have what I thought of as spiritual experiences or a spiritual background. And so it was pretty overwhelming. There was no way to describe what was happening. So the very first thing I did was I called a psychologist and went over everything that was happening with the psychologist. And the psychologist actually told me that I didn't have any problems. So that just sort of like took that whole side of the field out, And so the second thing I did was I started to open up to something more was happening. And I became interested in talking with people I normally wouldn't have talked with, like people from the spiritual community, or I was, more open to just synchronicities and things like that were unfolding. So, I mean, the first thing I wanted to know was that, this wasn't a negative thing that was happening, because I didn't have a frame of reference for it. It just started, and it was a presence of spirit and spiritual energies, and it was a presence of these extrasensory perceptions that would happen randomly but daily, but randomly. It wasn't like it was a set period of time where I would do some kind of meditation and it would go so much deeper than what I thought a meditation could go. It would go into these visions, and in the visions I would be shown, literally what I needed to do next. So it was a great unfolding. The resistance was fear, and the fear and doubt, overtake you. So don't know what's happening. You don't know what's going to come from it. There's no trodden path for it, especially when I started. So it was like walking, every step into the unknown, giving up everything that you had known before, to embrace this, including this at that time, the support of a lot of other people, because they just didn't get it, So it's like you're supposed to be following a very set trajectory in your life, and all of a sudden you're kind of throwing that all away to do something else. And some people just don't understand that. So all of those things, I think, create certain kinds of resistances. And in my case, though, I think the biggest resistance was just fear and doubt. Mm-hmm. So I doubted that any of it could be true, because I just didn't have a frame of reference for it. And then ultimately had to confront that doubt as things came true, which really made me go deeper into the experience. I realized that I was doubting just the gateway. Like, I was doubting just the original opening of the door to go into this, alternate reality. And once I went through that door by basically like the guess and check model that this was actually real, then I realized how deep it really went. And that opened up, a series of experiences over the last 20 years that have actually just gone deeper and became more interesting. And funny enough, in the last 3 months or 4 months, it's actually been the most interesting time of the entire journey.
Do you have a explanation just within yourself as to why awakening, or whatever it was shown, whatever called you? Did you get to a place where you have an understanding of that?
I think in my case, I asked for it. So in my early 20s, I had already played out what I thought was the trajectory of adult life. And I'd kind of already seen where it ends up both being successful and ultimately this great tragedy that it all ends in. And philosophically, it wasn't a very palatable concept for me at that time. So, I grew up in Silicon Valley in the 90s when antidepressant drugs became the popular thing. And I saw all these unbelievably materially successful people who were our parents, the parents of all the kids that I went to school with, all sick. And so it didn't make any sense to me. I was trying to figure out how, this sort of wealth worship, technology worship experience that we all lived in could ultimately have everyone in their 40s be sick. It just literally didn't make sense. And so I was very interested in seeing if there was any kind of help beyond antidepressants that we could ultimately find or support with. I also thought that, the trajectory, obviously, it brought us from our, teen years to 20s, 30s, 40s into the 40s, we would be in some kind of crisis like them. And so in my early 20s, I just asked for it. I asked to be shown if there was something more behind this existence. I asked if there was, any truth to spirit. I asked if there was any truth to God or source. I asked if there was, something more important about the universe other than just materialism and death and the kind of the continuous worship of fear throughout our life in this kind of, ever impending doom of what could possibly happen. And I was also tired of like the doom and gloom story of life at that time. So I thought, like, in my early 20s, how my biggest fear at that time was how you actually make it to like 70 or 80 and die. Because it's like, how do you go from early 20s in this world that seems like it's so chaotic, seems like it's so falling apart, seems like we've created as a species so many problems, seems like everybody's, laden with problems. How do you even survive it? And why would you even want to? It was just like this perplexing question for me.